Okay, there we go.
So it looks like we're all set.
Yep.
Okay, I don't have the agenda in front of me, but welcome everybody to our April Legislative Committee meeting. And sounds like things are happening in Lansing. So I think we'll take, so John, I think I'm just gonna let you go ahead.
I'll take it over.
It.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Baker. So we really have two things on the agenda. One is just a legislative update. I know we chose to cancel last month as there really wasn't anything new to report. A lot of things were largely stuck in neutral. But now that we're post spring break, things are starting to heat up again. And so we wanted to keep this meeting. I think we can hopefully keep this meeting relatively brief because really the focus is on an update that Chris Glass is going to go through and then Rusty and I will chime in. And then Rusty has some updates on Capital Day planning and then we'll be good to go. So with your support, Dr. Baker, I'm just going to turn it over to Mr. Glass. Chris, you want to jump in with your update?
Welcome, Chris. Mr. Glass.
For the viewers, Chris Glass is the director of the West Michigan Talent Triangle, which is a coalition of school districts and ISDs throughout West Michigan, from Kent County, Ottawa County, and Muskegon County.
All right. Thank you, John Helmholt and Dr. Baker, for the opportunity to give you some information on what's happening. I thought first and foremost, I would start just with a general overview of where we're at in regards to policy discussions as well as budget discussions in Lansing. So first and foremost, it was February that Governor Whitmer put forward her executive budget proposal for fiscal year 22. And that was predicated on revenues the state anticipated having during its January consensus revenue estimating conference. And for members who are viewing, that's a special conference that's held to where the Department of Treasury, among others, try to forecast what tax revenues will be collected throughout the upcoming year. One of the things that occurs once that consensus revenue estimating conference happens is each and every month they start to track the revenues that are coming into state and they benchmark them against what they projected. And the good news is that the projections are being outpaced by the revenue collections. And so what that means is by the time we get to May, when the next consensus revenue estimating conference takes place, we fully anticipate the state will be in a healthier position fiscally than what was expected in January, which likely will yield more positive discussions for the budget. And so I think it's important for everybody to note that. Above and beyond that, there's a considerable amount of obviously federal stimulus that came through the American Rescue Plan. Largely the discussions around the federal stimulus have been focused on K-12 for our purposes, which is significant and we'll discuss a little bit. But it's also worth noting there was significant amount of money that was allocated to the state and local units of governments that will help offset either lost revenue or will help fund projects, initiatives, and other things in order to mitigate the harm caused by the pandemic and to jumpstart some activities. And so what that means is that when you couple that federal stimulus along with resources that individual taxpayers have received in the form of direct stimulus payments and the positive news out of the month-over-month revenue projections of the state, we're in a very healthy place financially. And I foresee that will be the case for the next couple of years at least as we work to fund critical operations like schools. So that gives you the broad perspective and overview. I did want to share real briefly some budget priorities as we talk to legislators to make them aware of things that we're interested in looking for. And I have shared my screen to be able to dive into this a little bit further. First and foremost, our key priorities remain that we're going to remain focused on a weighted student funding formula. And so when we talk about foundation grant increases, we also want to see investments in special education, in at-risk, in our English language learner population, among other things. Because as we know, Michigan has a long ways to go to make good on its promise to have resources dedicated to every student to meet their individual needs. And so we've made some progress. We have a long ways to go, and we're expecting another step in that direction. And that's our call to action for our legislative delegation. Another key priority for us is enrollment stabilization is critical. We know when we start the fiscal year, the 2021-2022 school year, there still is going to be a lot of uncertainty around enrollment until we have normalized conditions on which to operate schools. And so we are pushing and calling for stabilization formulas on enrollment to make sure that we do not have significant financial consequences based on what the conditions of the pandemic. Another key factor of our priorities, flexibility and resources, is important. We continue to see on occasion specific categoricals in which districts must adhere to specific requirements in order to secure funding. And given the state of the pandemic and its impact and how it's impacted each and every community differently, we think the best scenario for school districts is to provide flexibility in those resources so that they can put them to use to best meet the needs of their students. And then finally, a key priority that is reoccurring, we also want to make sure we're maintaining the health of our retirement system. That way our state can fulfill its obligation to all the incredible people who work on behalf of our children.
So real quick, Chris, sustaining the health of Mipsers, what does that actually mean in terms of what we're lobbying for?
So when we take a look at what's happening with the Mipser system, there's been adjustments made through the assumptions that really fund the pension system. And not to be too cryptic, every pension system that's created, the numbers work out because you have to assume, right, a number of things in order to figure out how much money to put into it, where your investments go, and then ultimately people are drawing their pension. One of the things we've noticed over the last several years is the system is actually getting more conservative in its assumptions. And the idea is by being more conservative, right, it requires more money to be put up front. And then there's a stronger likelihood that the system itself will have the assets to pay out to those who are drawing a pension. And one of the things that we've seen, which is good news, right, people who are drawing from the system are living longer and therefore, you know, pulling a pension for a longer period of time. And that's required additional resources to be put in. Another change that's recently happened, there was some ambitious assumed rate of returns. So when they make the investments into the stock market and other ways, they're reducing the assumed rate of return so that they don't have to make as risky of investments and actually to hit those projections. And so those are a few things that have happened recently, but it makes the system healthier, but it does require additional resources to be put forward. And this year alone, that is a $200 million plus sort of investment that would need to be made to keep pace with ensuring the health of the system.
So, okay. So when we're lobbying, we're asking for a review of those conditions, and are we also discussing how much the school systems would be paying into it, or finding ways to, et cetera, or asking employees to pay into it more?
It's sort of all of the above approach. We're not asking employees to pay in more, although because when you do get more conservative assumptions, the Department of Management and Budget, which runs the pension system, right, Mipsers, there are those normal cost increases. What we really are pushing for is making sure that they maintain those line items that go to offset the costs that districts face when paying those Mipsers related costs. And so thankfully within this budget, they've continued to do that. They've allocated those resources to make sure we're not paying considerably more at the district level.
Okay.
And then just for me, a point of clarification and understanding. So the districts that have to pay in to the difference that was done by Snyder and so forth, how are we lobbying to offset that or to minimize our contribution, because that's taking away from other areas that we would probably normally either invest or have available? Am I right or assuming?
Yes, you are right, Reverend Matias, in the fact that, you know, as the system becomes more conservative and requires additional resources, right, there's opportunity costs to that. So those are dollars that couldn't go to a foundation grant, couldn't go to other places. The good news is fiscally, we're in a position to where we're healthy enough to where we can do both and we have the resources to do it.
Okay.
What we've really wanted to make sure, though, is when you're Grand Rapids Public Schools or any other school district, you do not have to face that burden alone within your school district budgets. And so what we would not want to have happen is the state to provide you with $150 per pupil increase, but because of adjustments they made to the retirement system, $140 of that was spoken to.
Right.
That is not the case with what we've seen with what's been put forward, and that speaks to that dynamic of the health.
Awesome.
Right.
Okay,
And I'll just add in that really the bulk of that lobbying is there's a capped amount that schools have to pay for their retirement, and the state takes care of everything over that. I think it's 26. It's a 26.1. Chris, do I have that?
20.96.
20.96.
Yep.
And so that then those categoricals that Chris talked about take care of the cost beyond that, so that we're capped at a rate. And I don't remember what date that was. It's probably mid 2000s.
Yep, exactly. All right, moving forward, ESSER 3, which also is part of the American Rescue Plan. And this is the Biden stimulus package we've discussed previously. Michigan is set to receive for its K-12 schools $3.72 billion. Roughly 80% of this has already been allocated or pushed from the Department of Treasury to the state level. So for members of this group to understand, 90% of those dollars are going to flow through that Title I-A formula like we saw before. However, there is a little bit different flavor than what we saw with the previous stimulus packages, in that 20% of that Title I-A allocation must be set aside for learning loss. Now, the learning loss definition per Congress is very broad. I would not anticipate GRPS or any other district would have trouble satisfying the requirement of that set aside. A significant difference, though, for the last two federal stimulus packages, we've been talking about the state having this 10% in flexible spending. Congress really tightened the screws and did not provide as much flexibility to the state level as they did before. And so when we look at Michigan's allocation, they've said that 5% of our allocation must be set aside for evidence-based interventions. That's $186 million. 1% must be set aside for evidence-based summer enrichment programs. That's $37 million. 1% for after-school programs. Again, that's $37 million. And then they only have 2.5% of state discretion, which is $93 million. So I do anticipate these will be grants that districts will apply to. Districts like GRPS, of course, will qualify and be able to secure some of these resources. But this is just a little bit different than what we saw before. So I thought it was worth mentioning to the group. Okay, just to let you know, foundation grant increase, the governor's budget recommendation, to be frank, is lighter than we probably would have liked to have seen. It was allocated in a 2X formula. So districts like GRPS who are at the minimum foundation grant are scheduled to get that $164 increase. But like I said in my opening remarks, I do think there are going to be revenues there to have a higher foundation grant increase than what was put forward by the executive branch. We are always going to recommend and push for additional resources in the foundation grant. This is your most secure line of funding. This is the one that gives you the most certainty and is the basic amount of which, of course, you're going to support your student population. Weighted student funding. The governor's executive recommendation did not put a great deal of resources towards the weighted student funding allocations. And so we are asking for additional investments to at-risk, special education, and English language learners to continue to make progress in a significant way on that weighted student funding formula. Enrollment stabilization, what does this look like? The executive recommendation called for $200 million to be put into a categorical, and it would provide 70% funding for pupil loss from the 2020-21 school year. And so just to put this in perspective, if you were a 15,000 student district in 2020-21, and in 2021-22, you were a 14,000 student district, you would receive under the governor's recommendation 70% of the funds for the 1,000 students in which were not enrolled. So we will look to see what the House and the Senate put forward in terms of their own enrollment stabilization formulas, but this is a priority for us along with other education associations. And we're also asking for investment in the Great Start Readiness Program. This is critical also to GRPS and making sure students are kindergarten ready and succeeding early in their academic careers. Over the past 7 years, we have not seen an increase in the funding for GSRP. Back in 2013 and 14, there was a sizable expansion of this program. However, since that time, there's been no additional investment. And what that means is it makes it incredibly challenging to operate that program without pulling resources from other financial revenue streams, or just having significant financial stress for the program overall. So GRPS does run its own Great Start Readiness program. Investments in this program and this line item would benefit the district as well as the students who are partaking in that program. All right, so what I wanted to do now is stop sharing my screen. I wanted to give you a general update that I anticipate over the next 2 weeks, we're going to see the House and the Senate come forward with their own budget proposals. And then we're going to have this sort of procedural back and forth until the May Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference. And that's when the real negotiation is going to start taking place between the legislature and the governor. I also anticipate that that's when we'll actually see the remainder of those ESSER 2 funds that have been held back likely be appropriated through a supplemental budget based on information I've heard. And so Grand Rapids Public Schools has a sizable allocation under ESSER 2 that is still at the state level and is not released. When they take that action, those resources would be released and you'd be able to use them to support students. So John, that's what I have for the group, and I'm happy to take any particular questions.
Thanks, Chris. I would just add, between you, Chris, and Rusty, I guess let me step. Do you want to stop on just the budget related stuff now and ask questions? Because where I was going was an update on teacher eval, third grade reading. So I wasn't sure if you had anything you want to continue on that, or do we want to pause, focus on the budget first here?
Yeah, why don't we focus on any budget related questions or conversations and then move on to the other policy.
John, can I provide some context to what Chris is talking about, just in terms of the atmosphere? Because I think that's important. There seems to be a thawing of the relationship between the governor and the legislature. This is just one lobbyist's opinion, but you hear a lot around town. The fact that the governor made recommendations about what people should do during the surge, as opposed to issuing an order. And then you had both the speaker and the majority leader praise her and talk about people need to be responsible and do the right thing. That to me was a very important moment in time for the budget sort of moving forward and what they're doing. They still have not sat down to talk about it and how the funds are being spent, but you're going to start to see proposals from each of the chambers as to how those federal dollars would be spent. But there is a thawing of that relationship, which is encouraging to be able to get to a point where they can make an agreement. At this point, I did not suspect that we're going to have another situation where you'll have a budget negotiated in its final form that the governor has not been involved in, and then makes all kinds of vetoes and moves administration that we saw before. So I am overly optimistic usually anyway, because I want to make sure, I want to believe that people want to do the right thing ultimately, but there has been some thawing of that. So I just wanted to sort of drop that out there so that folks could react to that as well, but happy to take any questions. Sorry.
Well, that's good to hear, because I was wondering what was happening, but yeah, that's, I caught that with the governor's.
And I was told today that the governor's office is making calls to folks to say who would step up and make statements about encouraging people to wear masks and act responsibly and do that sort of thing, because the governor does not want to have to issue any more orders. And that to me is a huge change in how this is sort of going. There's a political reality to that, I think, as to why that is happening. But I do think there is this sort of desire to try and work towards an agreement. So I would just say to GRPS, the governor's office is looking for folks to make statements about wear your masks, do social distancing, those kinds of things. There may be some opportunity for us there. And I'll follow up with John.
Yeah, that's great.
No, it's nice to to have the responsibility put back on us, and for us as citizens to do the right thing when we look around at each other. So, I don't want to harm you and I don't want you to harm me. And so I want to be responsible. And I think the majority of people will respond that way. Very few are opposed that way. So nice.
It's always the edges. It's always the edges.
Any other questions regarding the budget? This is all great news.
Yes, I was going to say the same thing. It's nice. Nice.
Much
Chris,
different news
Chris-
than what we were experiencing a year ago, if you might recall from today, is
Yeah.
when, I mean, that we didn't have the May revenue estimating conference that had the most doom and gloom, but everyone was projecting it even in April. So, this is certainly encouraging. There's going to be more to it. And then just going to reiterate what was said is that this is going to go through the sausage making here and really won't come to a head until the May revenue estimating conference. And then from there, that's when they really come together, and we'll have a much better idea what things are going to look like shortly thereafter. Rusty and Chris, any thoughts on what the likelihood is we might actually see, if nothing else, the K-12 budget be done before July 1st? I know that was another key priority for us, and something that Governor Snyder led quite successfully was to get us those budgets earlier than normal. And certainly this last time around was not an ideal scenario. Obviously there was COVID and a lot of factors, but it went a lot later. I mean, was it September? I mean, we were right up to that October 1 deadline. So have we heard anything about their desire to try to expedite the budget so that we have more degree of confidence in knowing what we're going to base our budgets on?
Barring a tremendous surge and a new order from the governor and sort of a refreezing of relations, I would suspect that by mid-June we would have a budget. Chris, I don't know what you're hearing, but that's my sense. Everybody wants to get it done.
Yeah, I think the only wild card is obviously to be able to analyze those House and Senate legislative proposals and making sure that there's a healthy relationship in negotiating and all parties working towards an outcome. I think if you ask anybody independently, they'll say, yes, we want to get the budget done. And then when it doesn't get done in a timely fashion, they always point to the other person as the reason why it didn't happen. And so, as Rusty said, as long as they can continue to work together, there's optimism that it'll be done much earlier. However, that's on thin ice. And I think we should be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's fair.
Okay.
Great. Do you want to shift to policy side now, guys?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Sure.
Rusty, you want to take the lead here, just given the third grade reading conversations you've had in teacher evaluation?
Yeah, so obviously we had the Senate Republicans put together a proposal in terms of evaluations and third grade reading, which we've talked to this committee before in terms of our priorities of getting those suspended for this year. We did spend a tremendous amount of time with the Education Committee chair, who drove to Grand Rapids from Livingston County to spend some time with us. And she gave us about 2.5 hours where we sat and talked about GRPS. And it was a very, very productive meeting. And out of that meeting, some of those proposals came, and her agreement on some of those proposals in terms of changing the dynamic of that evaluation system moving forward, but also pausing evaluations in third grade reading this year. That proposal met with a tremendous amount of pushback from the charter community and from some in the business community, because the student growth was going to be dropped to 25% from 40% in perpetuity. And so that met with some resistance, and the Senate Republicans sort of dropped it. And what I am told is that they are working on a scaled down version that would essentially pause this year's evaluations in third grade reading. The question that we have is whether the House would take that up, but we've had good conversations with the chair in the House from GRPS and others about why that's important, and I think there's some opportunity there. I was asked twice this week what was sort of the drop dead of being able to get this done and it being able to be impactful to the districts. And what we said was about the first or second week of May, as Chris pointed out to me last year, or the year before last, when we got the pause for 25 to 40, it was about the second week of May. So if they're asking that question, they're thinking about it. The champion in the Senate is a gentleman by the name of Senator Ken Horn from the Saginaw area, and he's very passionate about this. And I talk with his staff about twice a week about what they're working on and how they're doing it. And so we're continuing to push. We probably got 3 weeks. And frankly, we can get something done in 3 weeks if they're willing to push. I've also heard that some of the charter community and the business community is more open to just pausing those two things than they may have been 4 weeks ago, but still pretty adamant on their feelings about 40 down to 25%. Chris, does that comport with what you're hearing?
Yes, it does. And the education to those other groups continues to help them understand responsibly using assessment scores and things like teacher evaluation. So we remain committed to that journey.
So I want to be clear, the charter and business community concurs with us on that? Is that what you're saying?
No, they
Okay.
were, there was opposition to both
Okay.
pausing and dropping that
Okay.
growth number from 40 to 25.
Okay,
We
so
think there's
that's
some
where the
softening
challenge is.
there's some softening on the pause.
And the charter schools wanted the 40%?
I mean, my understanding is they're comfortable with that number.
What were they vacillating on, or, the differences that you saw, Rusty?
I want to make sure I understand vacillating in terms of why is there movement?
Yeah, movement, and then adamant on certain things and not others.
The business community is probably the stronger voice on the 40 to 25%. Chris, correct me where I'm wrong, but that seems to be a real push that they want that growth score to be that high. And part of it is, honestly, I think when we talked about the evaluation package that we ultimately supported, that it was negotiated that it would go to 25 to 40. And I think part of it is they are digging in because that was the number that everyone had agreed to, 5 or 6 years ago. And so we ought to stick to our agreements. I think there's some of that. I do think from their perspective, they have some policy reasons, but that's my sense is some of this is, hey, we had a deal, guys. And not everybody agreed to the deal. So I don't want to say that, but that's part of it.
Well, for this year though, they're open to just the understanding that growth is hard to measure this year.
I think they're more open on evaluations than they are third grade reading.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of a complex policy topic that impacts the livelihoods of an already strained profession. And the simple talking point is, if you're not about student growth, what are you about? And that should be 40% of a teacher evaluation. And the reality is, these evaluation tools that districts are utilizing are all built upon rubrics that all are research-based, that all have a great deal of feedback to the profession of teaching that's provided to our educators. And that's where the real student growth occurs. And so it's just the work continues to help them understand that the law as implemented, and now that we have several years, there's areas that we can improve that's only going to strengthen the teaching profession and make people have stronger belief that the evaluation law in its entirety is fair and thus can be believed in. And so I think that's where we have to continue to educate folks on the advocacy side, not only directly within legislative circles, but also associations who continue to engage in education topics.
Yeah, it's obviously not the student growth that we're asking to not be held accountable for. It's this measurement tool for student growth, given the changes that have happened this year. So
absolutely.
And
So
then
we're going to keep pushing.
The third grade reading, that's not just a teacher livelihood issue. That's family and children's future. And, obviously we've had much less control over how students learn this year than we normally have.
Yeah, it's the third grade reading law. Every time you take a standardized assessment, whether it's the MSTAP or benchmark assessment, there's a normalized scale score there, right? So we try to get all the information we can based on everybody who takes the test. We try to figure out where they fall, and then we set sort of cut scores. And this is what's proficient, this is what's not proficient. The third grade reading law is no different. We're trying to figure out which kids are quote unquote more than a year behind. Well, the problem is in a pandemic, we don't have statistically valid or reliable data. And so therefore you don't have a statistically reliable cut score you can establish. So what they're doing is they're using old cut scores for the MSTEP as well as the benchmark assessments onto this year when it's not relevant for the conditions we're in, which is highly inappropriate when we look at it from, as you spoke of, Dr. Baker, the impact it can have on children. So thankfully, all of the good cause exemptions still exist to where parents can opt out of retention. The district can put forward portfolios of student work to get them around retention. But the unfortunate part is there's going to be additional work done by districts out of compliance of the law when it's not necessary if we get the suspension in place.
If they truly want us focusing on the classroom and the work in the classroom, they would suspend this so that we could do that rather than work on exemptions.
I also wonder how we could communicate user-friendly, accurate information that's unbiased, so that, even the conversation that we had here, it would be nice to have that kind of clarity of conversation or communication, so that really there's not a whole lot of guessing, politicizing, if you will, but just really, what do we do, and this is how these things affect. And so, at least from a legislative, I'm just wondering how we would be able to put out accurate information like that people can pick up, look at it, read it, in essence, judge for themselves, but have it there so that they can intelligently converse and or write or communicate to others, legislators and so forth.
Yeah, and I think our effort has been getting to those in decision-making spots to really talk about that. And I'll certainly defer to Chris as well, but I think we've done a good job of convincing the policymakers that this needs to happen. It's their constituencies that are pushing back against them. And to your point, and that I think that's what the effort is by the school community to those outside groups. I mean, I've had conversations with CLEP and others saying, all right, guys, just understand what this means, and trying to push that, and also other community leaders. And so, I think we're sort of slowly turning the boat. Can we turn it in the next 3 weeks?
Right. I would just add, and kind of again to reiterate what Rusty said. I mean, Senator Tice, who's the chair of the Senate Education, had some pretty strong opinions. And through an ongoing relationship, plus of that 2-hour plus meeting, she really, our efforts are paying off, and starting with some of the key leaders. And so we're going to continue to push. We're kind of at the tip of that spear in many ways, but there are also a lot of other dynamics and realities with her caucus as well as with the House caucus. And so we're going to keep pushing, but just know we're in the thick of it. And that's something that you as a board and this committee has really supported your platform and our advocacy efforts in this manner. And that's the reason why they turn to us for that input, and why we're really right in the middle of it. So we're going to keep pushing on it.
John, in terms of for lack of a better word, a model, or the numbers that we're showing in our growth of student growth, is that reflective of our legislative approach? So are we backing it up with our numbers, saying this is how we are showing our growth, and fiscally responsible and so forth, so that we can when we do propose something, we're saying, hey, we're actually doing it.
Yep.
And we're actually proposing these things because we're able to deliver on that.
Yeah, John, when we met with Senator Tice, and actually when we had that legislative luncheon, you might recall, we brought in a principal and a teacher, and we basically really showed them. In this case, we brought in Steve Petros, who's our assessment guru, and we showed her the data. We had Leanne, the principal, was there too. And then part of it is that if you look at our map data, we actually saw growth in pretty much every grade level in both subject areas. But the reality is that's not reflective of all students. That's reflective of the students that were showing up, but the 25% or more that were inconsistent or really didn't participate in the test at all. That's where the area of concern is. And so you have educators essentially being evaluated based on data that's just simply not valid and unreliable. And if in fact growth is an evaluation is going to be tied to that, then that right off the bat kind of demonstrates. And you may actually have a teacher who is ineffective and has maybe been on an improvement plan, but due to COVID and 25-30% of the kids not taking the test, it's showing huge growth. And so all of a sudden that individual becomes highly effective as a result. And that's not maybe a good example, but you get the point of what I'm trying to make, is that it's further example of how this data really should not be used in any high stakes assessment or evaluation. That's what we've been saying all along. We've said, look, the district, we were supportive of evaluations. We were supportive of third grade reading with a lot of strings attached, and we were really a leader on both those issues. But we're not saying throw it all out. We're simply saying, in this particular turn, this time with COVID, there's got to be a pause. And then, we're going to continue to make the argument why we believe growth should be from 40 to 25, regardless of COVID. And that'll be part of it. But yes, to answer your question, Revan, we are absolutely bringing the data, bringing the people on the ground to share how these decisions directly impact them.
Just to put a fine point on this, when you have a legislature that indicated it wanted to be involved in decisions regarding the pandemic, when the governor's executive powers were restricted from the Supreme Court, and then you have situations like this where there's clear and convincing evidence that these adjustments need to be made, and yet they're not being made, you undercut the law in a longer term way when people have to find ways to make it work because our legislature did not take the appropriate action to do so. Because at the end of the day, all of you have an obligation to the teachers you serve to make sure they're not harmed, nor are kids harmed. And so that's where it becomes really two things that collide together. And you're always going to side with, right? You're going to comply with the law, but there's the spirit of law, and then there's actually the execution of it. And I think those things are at odds right now in this environment.
I do hope that that the public reviews this committee and the conversation, because I think it will help them or arm them with accurate information to both communicate and dig in for themselves too, and stuff. So thank you.
I appreciate you saying that, Rev, because this is not clear and easy to understand. And it's just, there's nothing simplistic about anything in K-12, let alone in the middle of a COVID and with laws related to evaluation and third grade reading. It is highly nuanced, very complex, convoluted in many ways. And of course, you have the hyper political nature of everything right now, COVID, post-presidential, all of that dynamic is in play. And we have the enviable job of trying to navigate through all of that.
I'll work with
As someone
John
as someone once told me, if the solutions were easy, we would have done them already. This is hard stuff.
That's right.
Well, it seems to me like
That's
the
what I have for
solutions
an
would be
update.
easy if they just listened to us. So. Okay.
All right, so I think that's it for updates right now. If there's not any other questions, Rusty, you want to give kind of a, I know, we're getting around that time.
See you, Chris.
Chris, you got to take off. All right.
Thanks, bud.
Chris,
Thanks,
thanks
bud.
for all you do, brother. We appreciate you.
Mutual feeling. Thank you.
See you, bud.
Rusty, you want to give an update?
Yeah, I had hoped that we might be able to do in person because we would all be vaccinated and things would be better. But I just, with the surge and everything going on, it just doesn't feel like that's a responsible thing to do. So I would like to look at a couple of Mondays and Fridays in May, specifically the 10th, 14th, or 17th, to do a Capitol Day, and we'll do it virtually. And the reason I want to do it on a Monday is we're going to be in legislative times where we have people canceling and doing all that stuff. And Zoom has created an opportunity where we can do meetings with legislators on Mondays and Fridays. And so what I would propose that we do is a morning or an afternoon, either a 1 to 4 or a 9 to 12, where we would bring in the board and stick them on a permanent Zoom. And then we would just bring guests in into that Zoom over the course of that 3 hours. So we just need to find a block of time. I think any of the Mondays or Fridays in May, we can make that work and sort of make our impact known, because as Chris said, the real negotiations don't start until after the revenue conference. So.
Yeah, I think that's probably good. May is our board retreat is May 21st. So that Friday is not and I'm not, Chris, Rusty, sorry, I didn't write down the dates. I think Mondays are harder because we'll have other GRPS business on those days, and it might be hard to schedule a 3-hour block and the other business.
Yeah.
So I would say like a 1 to 4 on most Fridays. I think that if we schedule them far in advance, we can probably do those.
Do we want to look? Can we look at the 14th?
We actually have this committee scheduled for the 14th. So one of those 3 hours is already spoken for. So I don't know.
Well, we could do it in 2. There's no magic to the 3, right? It's who can I get in those 2-hour blocks? I can get 4 or 5 meetings. I think we can get 4 of the sort of leaders, and the board would feel like their time was well spent and it would actually be impactful. So.
And I think
that 14th worked for me. So
14th.
Well, and again, we can always use if you prefer, there's no reason we couldn't either cancel and reschedule the legislative committee, or just simply use that time for the Capitol Day instead. Just cancel it
or call it. Yeah. And we would need to be prepared in this kind of scenario. In the in person, it's kind of more of a back and forth. The legislators talking about their concerns, and then we're talking about our concerns. I'd like to get that more. Are we sending a message? Are we just giving an opportunity to listen to the legislators? I think that's we can decide
we
that
would
later.
We would be presenting our priorities to them.
Okay. And
really, for many of them, it would be a repeat of those, but from the board.
Okay. I think that May 14th, I don't know if Kim is able to answer, but I think that at this point we would make it available to all the board members. Kim?
I'm available. I can make that work.
Typically, if we had we've opened that up to just whoever from the board wants to go, not just the committee.
Yes.
And that makes it even easier when it's virtual, in all honesty.
Right. And so we could actually have board members come and go, right? So we wouldn't have to have the same.
We could have better participation. Yep.
Okay. Let's do that.
If we want to sort of tentatively lock that in, I'm going to have my office start to work on meetings. We'll get somebody from the administration and the budget office. we'll get subcommittee chairs, and we'll get some key leaders in order to be able to have that discussion.
Okay, let's do that, and then maybe John and I can just we'll just, if we can put it out, John, maybe at the next board meeting, present this as an opportunity, and then we'll just try to have a schedule of which board members are going to be available at which time.
Yeah.
That way, everybody has talking points, so we're not contradicting.
Yep. Cool.
All right. Okay, great. That sounds
Rusty,
good.
I'll connect with that. So what are we saying? Just I want to make sure I'm clear. So May 14th,
1 to 4.
1 to 4. That's what, okay. All right, great.
Is there any other discussion agenda?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks, Rusty.
Thanks, everyone.
Be
Thank
careful.
you.
on your
Thanks for the
commute,
time.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Rusty.
Just say hello from Charleston. Now, your son's at Savannah, right? Your son's in Savannah, not Charleston.
Right. So Stacy and I went down there to try to decide which of those places we want to settle in. So I tell you what, visit those places in February and March, and it's crazy to be here.